Welcome, everyone, to Cornell Keynotes. I am Heather Kolakowski, Executive Director for the Cornell Institute for Healthy Futures, and I'm excited that you have joined us for this great hour of programming that we have put together today for our webinar, The Pursuit of Wellbeing: Trends, Behaviors, and Strategies for the Wellness Industry. Viewers, we're interested in hearing from you today, and we will take your questions. Please submit them in the chat. The chat can be opened by clicking the dialog box at the top right of your video player. And throughout our discussion, we will be sharing URLs and resources in the chat as well. So a heads up for those. And if you're watching the archived recording, those links are available in the overview section just below. As always, today's live stream is being recorded and will be available to view shortly after the show's over today. And did you know that the keynotes are also simulcast on YouTube, LinkedIn Live, and Facebook Live? We'll share those links to those channels in the chat as well. And for those of you who may not know, the Cornell Institute for Healthy Futures is the first academic center in the country to combine hospitality, environmental design, health policy and management into a broad-based platform to improve service in healthcare, wellness, senior living, and related industries. Through our network of academic and industry professionals, we collaborate and share ideas to focus on our vision of a society where everyone receives excellent health and wellness-related services in well-managed, well-designed, and hospitable facilities. Today, we will be sharing highlights from the WELLSurvey, a national survey exploring how U.S. adults understand and think about well-being. The survey set out to break down the concept of well-being and consider what these findings mean for resorts, retreats, spas, supplement brands, and medical therapy providers when promoting their products and services. WELLSurvey also looked at how the meaning of well-being aligns with the attitudes, beliefs, preferences, and behaviors of people who are interested in healthier lifestyles, which is a lot of us. The results offer a view into how those factors connect and where they don't connect, providing useful insights for anyone involved in wellness-related industries or communications. We hope that after today's webinar, you'll be able to apply these insights immediately within your organization. To start, I would like to welcome our panelists today. So, Peter, do you want to do a quick introduction?
Thank you, Heather. Good afternoon, everybody. Peter Nesowich. I've been active in the hospitality and the healthcare industries for over 40 years as a principal or a partner in my own firms, primarily focusing on marketing research strategy and developing communications. I co-founded MMGY Global, which is today the largest marketing communications company in the world that specializes in the travel, leisure, and entertainment industries. We have 700 professionals and 13 offices around the world. I also took a 10-year sabbatical in healthcare, specifically in oncology, working as the chief growth officer and a member of the national board of a national cancer care provider, which is where I really became interested in the application of principles of hospitality to healthcare and inspired a book that I would encourage hopefully many of you to read, recently published, called Hospitable Healthcare: Just What the Patient Ordered. And currently serve on a number of boards. I'm pleased to say one of which is the advisory board of the Institute for Healthy Futures at Cornell. I spent several years at Cornell, took a doctorate there with a concentration in psychology and service marketing. I'm delighted to do this with my partner, Kevin Kelly. I met Kevin years ago as he and I worked on a similar challenge when he was building a brand that has become really renowned in the wellness and well-being space called Canyon Ranch, and Kevin will tell you a little bit about himself now. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Peter, and thank you, Heather. I appreciate everyone taking the time to join us today. To give you a little background, my world started out as a sustainable developer. I was the first sustainable developer in the United States, first master plan sustainable developer. I also went on to build the first carbon neutral spa wellness resort that was basically 100% solar. My background in business on the wellness resort and leisure travel is I've been either the president or founder of 4 different wellness companies. I was the president, chief branding officer of Canyon Ranch, which is where I met Peter 25 years ago. and had the benefit of standing on the shoulders of some of those original entrepreneurs like Mel Zuckerman. I was the managing director and one of the owners of Two Bunch Palms, which we converted into a spa and wellness resort and doubled the revenue and doubled the occupancy, and then sold it comfortably, and started a brand called Savannah, which I soon left, and then started a brand based call from Dr. Agus and Larry Ellison for Sensei, which is a luxury spa wellness hospitality company. In addition to that, Peter and I have been involved in both research and publications around what are the trends in wellness and well-being, and how do the consumers react and why. And we hope to give you some of those insights today. And the report that will be provided a link for, it can go in much deeper than what we'll do in the slideshow. And lastly, I'm involved in a medical device company that's both does medical devices and does PBM longevity products. So I also have some manufacturing background. So thank you, Heather.
Yeah, well, it's wonderful to have both of you here today with such varied background and experience in the wellness space. It's definitely a passion of mine and something that the Institute for Healthy Futures, we're always looking for the research and being able to translate it to organizations and people so that they can create a healthier future. So let's get into it. Peter, do you want to share the survey?
Absolutely.
And your results?
I'm happy to. And hopefully at the outset, I'll say, Heather, that for many of us who tend to speak in a compound way about wellness and well-being, at the end of this, hopefully 45 minutes, you'll understand there's some critical differences here that are very meaningful to people, and importantly, very meaningful to people who are in the business of providing products, services, and experiences to individuals who want to pursue those. Well, Kevin and I believe that WELLSurvey 1.0 was the first probability survey that was undertaken in the US to explore consumers' understanding of these two concepts, wellness and well-being, and also the implications to providers of products and services in that industry. As Heather mentioned a moment ago, we've included a download link at the end of the presentation to a summary report which goes into far greater detail than we're able to do in the next 25, 30 minutes here, that I think if you're interested, you're going to find to be really quite provocative. So let's begin with just an overview of what inspired this work. And I think most on the webinar hopefully would agree with me that the industry has become highly decentralized through the rapid expansion of really multiple and increasingly disparate delivery platforms, spas, med spas, clinics, retreats, resorts, salons, fitness centers, supplements, the list goes on and on and on. In fact, I'm humored every time I drive by a strip mall and I can see the sign of another business that proclaims its expertise in wellness. And this growth has encouraged many businesses to climb aboard the bandwagon and declare their commitment to wellness because of its commercial appeal. Perhaps one of the most interesting and I thought intriguing proclamations on this was several months ago. I was watching CNBC and I saw the then CEO of Walmart proclaim that Walmart is a wellness company. And I had to stop for a moment and process that, as you might. But I think it's representative of the remarkable interest that's been displayed by commercial providers in this category. But there's a lack of evidence of based performance standards for metrics to measure the efficacy of specific products and services. And this absence has led to the proliferation of many questionable performance claims, which I think we see all the time in media. Resulting confusion in the marketplace has been exacerbated by providers who conflate the terms wellness and well-being. They use them synonymously in the promotion of their wares. And all this has occurred while the demographic, the attitudinal and lifestyle changes of the consumer have evolved, and the health and lifestyle preferences of those consumers have changed. So we set 4 objectives to implement WELLSurvey 1.0. You see them here. I just briefly summarize these for you. Number 1 is to profile the health metrics, the interests, and the beliefs of the sample. And you'll see how we screen the sample in just a moment. Number 2 is to explore their understanding of these two concepts, wellness and well-being. Are they the same? Are they different? And I'll share that answer in just a moment. The third is to measure their interest in pursuing both outcome states. And the fourth was to define the size of the addressable market. for those of you that are interested from a producer's point of view. So here's a summary of the methodology. Very briefly, you can see it was a national probability survey in the US only. I make that distinction because in a moment, Kevin is going to share with you how we took WELLSurvey internationally here in a few moments. You can see this sample was just over 1,000 adults between the ages of 25 and 74, roughly half female, half male. And we screened them intentionally to represent the top half of households at that time defined by household income. The number you're looking at on the screen, 75,000, was the projected median household income at that point in time back in 2024. It's since risen to about 82, 83,000. And we actually conducted the field work in January of 24, and it was an online survey with an engagement lasting about 20 minutes. So let's take a look first at the question of, is there a difference between the concept of wellness and well-being, not in the minds of Kevin or me as the authors of the survey, but importantly in the minds of consumers today. So what we have here is a description, definition, I should say, of the concept of well-being that we composed, as I say, a priori. And by that, I mean, we did this in advance, and we did this with the benefit of our collective expertise in the category. I'd like to read this to you because I think it's very important that as I present this information to you, that we understand that the words do matter and there are some key differences here. So the definition that we tested in the survey: wellness is a state of physical and mental health. You feel fit, energized, and vibrant through the pursuit of specific activities, behaviors, choices, and lifestyles. And you'll notice here that 9 out of 10 of the respondents in this survey agreed with that definition. I'd now like to read to you the definition we tested for well-being. Well-being is a state of self-actualization that derives from your wellness, your physical and mental health, and emotional health, how you feel about your spiritual awareness, personal and community relationships, career achievements, financial security, and environmental factors, all the things that I think prevail in concerns for many of us today. You feel happy, healthy, joyful, socially connected, spiritually aware, and purposeful through the pursuit of activities, behaviors, choices, and lifestyles that align with that belief. So basically what you see here is that the concept of well-being includes the elements that comprise wellness, that is physical and mental health, plus the addition of emotional health. So therefore, consumers understand this to be a much more expansive and inclusive idea. Now, we then introduced another technique that is actually very insightful to deconstruct the meaning of these two words, and that is a word association test. What we did is we composed a roster of 18 different words that are commonly used to describe the concepts of wellness and well-being, and we asked respondents which of those words most closely described or was associated with each of the two concepts. And you can see samples of, actually not samples, but all the words here, but they include such words as energy, balance, mental health, emotional state fulfillment, and so on. Now, this slide reveals the 3 words that the respondents most closely associated with each concept and the strength of those associations as well. So if we take a look at this, you will note that the top 3 words for each of the 2 concepts describe very different outcomes. On the left, you'll see the top 3 words: physical strength, identified in this example by 55% of respondents, energy, and vitality. On the right, the 3 words most closely associated with the concept of well-being, as you see them here: peacefulness, joyfulness, and spirituality. Now, it's also interesting to look at the agreement on the right-hand side, the consensus agreement on just how much agreement there was for each of these words as associated with the concept of well-being. So what's the takeaway here? Well, very simply, is we've applied 2 different tests here, and the tests suggest to us that consumers do, in fact, perceive a difference between the concepts of wellness and well-being. It's clear that they believe these are different, even though most of the products and services and experiences that they see in the marketplace fail to recognize or to articulate this distinction. Now, it's a lot of words, but this may be a more helpful way to illustrate the difference between the two. And the relationship between these two concepts is visualized in this slide. You'll note that wellness, as I mentioned before, is defined by physical and mental health. Well-being is understood to be more holistic, as it includes emotional health. It also reflects the influence of the other contemporary determinants of well-being that I mentioned, such things as social relationships, spiritual beliefs, financial security, and environmental concerns. Now, there's been a tremendous amount of interest recently in the concept of longevity. So we decided to explore the perceived relationship between the concept of well-being and longevity. And you'll note from this slide that 2/3 of our respondents agreed with the statement. Well-being increases your longevity. Significantly more, by the way, than agreed with the statement, wellness increases your longevity. That's a very important clue because of the aspiration that most people hold in the pursuit of this idea of longevity. Now, you'll also notice here we explored respondents' interest in pursuing a lifestyle that would enhance their well-being, and we discovered that almost 1 out of 4 stated they would, as reflected in this slide. I'm more interested in enhancing my well-being than my wellness. This translates into an addressable market in the US of just over 20 million households based on the sample description that I provided previously as we screened them into the survey. We also performed cluster analysis on the 1,000 respondents, and we revealed 4 distinct market segments that were defined by their behavioral and psychographic profiles, as you see in this slide. And we don't have enough time to go ahead and get into a deeper description of each, but I have a very top-line description I'd like to share with you quickly. You'll notice the 4. Number 1, we call well searchers. These are adults who we define by their regular use of spa, alternative medicine, and healing therapies, such things as spa going and so forth. The second cluster we identified, we call well trackers. These are people who use wearables to track and monitor their health metrics. The third cluster we define as well fanatics, and that was a definition of individuals by their exercise frequency, whether none at all the way up to in excess of 7 hours a week. And then the final cluster that we identified, we call well Zoomers. You'll hear more about them in a moment for reasons that we think are pretty compelling. And their primary descriptor happened to be their age, in this example, between 25 and 34 years of age. So to summarize, WELLSurvey 1.0 revealed basically 3 insights. Number 1, the conflated use of the terms of wellness and well-being is misguided, and it fails to acknowledge what consumers believe are distinctly different benefits that derive from the achievement of each of those concepts. Number 2, the achievement of well-being is perceived to be a predictor of longevity, a state that many consumers aspire to achieve, as I mentioned a moment ago. And number 3, the addressable market of adults interested in enhancing their well-being is larger than the market of adults interested in enhancing their wellness. Now, collectively, these observations, we believe, has significant implications for the composition of the products, services, and experiences that providers bring to the marketplace today and will in the future, and importantly, both how and to whom they are promoted. So having discovered these insights, we wondered if the same attitudes, behaviors, and beliefs and interests were also sustained in the US 2 years later, and in the world elsewhere in the developed world. So what we did is we fielded an expanded version of WELLSurvey 1.0 with groups of like respondents screened in a similar fashion, demographically and behaviorally, in 2 additional countries, the United Kingdom and in Germany. And Kevin will now present to you the highlights of that work. And in the end, we're delighted to entertain your questions. And hopefully we have stimulated a few. So Kevin, over to you.
Well, thank you, Peter. So as Peter were just talking about, we took the 1.0 and we asked ourselves a couple of questions. How well does it travel? And when we go transatlantic or we go globally, do these assumptions hold up? And so we started off to do 2.0 to take a look at what is the market. And the methodology we used is we went to 3 nations. We went to the US at over 1,000 people surveyed in a probability survey. We went to over 800 both in the UK and Germany. evenly split amongst gender. The age was the same, 25 to 74 years old, top 50% of the household income. But we also wanted to explore something else. We wanted to take a look at not only the attitudes and the belief systems of our customer, which we had observed in 1.0, but where are they getting their information? How are they influenced? What is their brand preference? What is their destination preference? And so we added some other instruments to the survey. So a quick profile of the customer themselves is that they're generally in good health. This is an overall rating of the collective body. Surprisingly, over 90% of them are involved in some sort of physical activity. Many of them, a majority of them, collect their health metrics, often through wearables. Over 50% use spa, alternative medicine, and healing therapies. And 78% use vitamins and supplements, and that's a little higher in the US, and monitoring technologies a little higher in Germany, for instance. But so there were some cultural variances, but overall give you a good snapshot. I think the second thing is we take a look at is what is the notion around health and well-being. Now, we already parsed through wellness and well-being and longevity in Peter's 1.0 outline. And we then took a look at, well, how does this really fit together? And we found something unique. Now, let me give you a little side piece of data that's not in the slide. Since 2001, I have been studying many times with Peter in my various companies and my various resorts, how people define their sense of well-being, because it's such a pedestrian term. And in 2001, 60% of the people we surveyed, and these were spa-going customers, top half of the income, and 60% said, I measure my well-being by how hopeful, joyful, and energized I feel. So majority think of it as an emotional outcome. Peter and I did the same test in 2010, and it was 65%. And when we did this recent study, it was 74%. So we're starting to see a trend. And when I go younger, when we splice those responses by age, it gets as high as 79% of people under 44 view their well-being from an emotional outcome. So what does that mean? It means we've introduced the emotional state, not only in well-being, but now we're starting to see in this survey, the emotional state is both in wellness, well-being, and longevity. So that's a new introduction, because in the 1.0, it was predominantly focused around well-being. And so we came to realize that we use the emotional state almost as a barometer, a feedback loop. I do these activities, I have these outcomes, I have these emotional well-being outcomes, which is a combination of my emotional and my physical activities. And then I try to evaluate whether or not that investment, my time and my resources, is giving me a sustained sense of longevity. Can I sustain that? And so the emotional state becomes the barometer, the feedback loop. Very interesting, something to keep in mind, that we no longer can simply think about wellness and well-being separately, particularly as we go to younger groups, even though clearly still people perceive the activity, one is activity-based and one is outcome-based. So moving on, when we then said, what are the drivers? And we gave people 8 drivers, the same drivers we gave them in the 1.0 survey. And we then consolidated those 8 drivers by natural categories, the physiological factors, the emotional or relationship factors, economic or career, and others, environmental factors. And what we found was it was evenly spread this time, that the drivers towards well-being is both physiological and emotional. And ironically or interesting to us, the data was evenly split. We thought that was a pretty important piece of information to share with you. Then we asked ourselves, well, how are people getting their information today? Where is this information around wellness, well-being, longevity, biohacking, preventive health, functional health, et cetera, coming from? And we gave people 17, we gave them a number of 17 different terms to take a look at. And which ones did they, in fact, find more relevant or more trusting? And what we found is the top 3 were clinically proven, recommended by scientists or medical professionals, or evidence-based. So what does that tell us? Within the noise that we're all competing with all the time in social media, people start to sift through the value of that information, the trust level is based on science. Very important fact. Um, we then asked people, well, here are 17, social media platforms. How much do you use them? And what we found is 83% of our information is coming through social media. Tremendous number. It's even higher in Germany, or it's higher as you get. Well, how reliable is this information? And it never broke above 49%. Matter of fact, of all of the social media outside of um, podcasts and YouTube, most of them were hovering in the mid 30s. So now you're saying, okay, we get our information, but in fact, it's not reliable unless I bring back the trust factor, which is the science, right? So that's pretty interesting. The next thing is we delve deeper into the market segmentation Peter and I identified in 1.0 and published on, which is the WELLSurvey, right? The people following we baby boomers. And what we found is, number one, that's an age cohort we tested between 25 and 44. The big discovery, the important discovery was that the WELLSurvey group in all three countries had more in common with each other than the other age groups in their own country. So even though there was cultural familiarity in their own country, they actually identified and had more in common with each other. So that says, oh my gosh, what we're starting to look at is the potential of a global market group, right? A global TAM. And that starts to say that starts to give us a tremendous opportunity that we can craft messaging and strategy around one layer, even though you may change it for some cultural nuance or language. That's a big deal. And the second thing we found with this group is, unlike the people that came before them, where they had what we call stacked wellness services, right? That there were these individual events and they put them together: spa, cryotherapy, PBM, massage, emotional health, breathing techniques. This market, this core big global market, is saying, listen, we've grown up now with technology. We've grown up with the synthesis of data. We're expecting you to deliver your wellness product and services in an integrated way that fits into my ecosystem. So we have to start thinking in terms of ecosystems. And even though we may have a touch point, particularly, let's say, in leisure travel, where we have them for 5 days or 4 days or 2 weeks, you better connect that experience to their pre and post stay. And you better, particularly using technology. The other thing is we were very, very conservative some of the calculations are in the report if you pull it up. We're calling it an adjusted total addressable market, but really it's probably more of a serviceable, obtainable market. And that is, we took a look at what the penetration rate of this group was. So in the industrial areas, it's in the high 70s, meaning of that group, how many use some sort of wellness device, product, service. And then we extrapolated out to the secondary and the tertiary countries with much, much smaller penetration rates, in the teens. And we also took a look at a couple of studies, both from our own studies and also 2 independent markers about what would be a reasonable spend. And the number is, this group represents 500 to 600 billion annual spend, and growing, because they're now only stepping into their peak performance period. So it's a pretty exciting piece of data in target group for this group. The next thing we took a look at is, okay, where are we with the hospitality world? Now, I come from the wellness, health and wellness hospitality world, and it's always an important category. Obviously, it's where there's a lot of touch points where people get to experience their wellness at a very deep level, profound level. And we tested 36 prominent wellness hospitality brands. And to our surprise, only when we asked people, which is your preferred brand, the majority, 53%, expressed no preference. Now, that was surprising to us, right? It starts to imply there's a dilution of brand in the category. Doesn't mean that there aren't many of them. In fact, it may be the success of so many luxury spa hotels and wellness brands entering the market and offering language, even though there may be some differentiation, that it's basically perceived as there's a sameness. Now that's a concern. The second thing is we looked at what were the 2 prominent preferred brands, and we came up with 6 Sense and Canyon Ranch, both just peaked above 10%. and the rest were, between 3 and 5%. So you never saw an overly dominant brand in the market. Now, what does that say for the business people? Opportunity. Where there's a void, right? Yeah, there's an opportunity. The other thing we found, which I think was interesting, is a little green shoot, is that 6 Sense, when we broke it down by age group, had the largest percentage of well zoomers that were interested in that brand. So somewhere along the line, probably with Anna, particularly in the days of 6 Sense, they have gotten to a language and a product and a messaging and maybe locations that started to intrigue that brand. So, what are the takeaways here? The takeaways are you need to start to integrate your programs and products and services into the WellZoomers ecosystem. You either integrate or you're going to lose ground. The second thing is you earn trust through science and through verified standards, which goes back to the old wellness and well-being. If we don't have standardization, the consumer will be confused. And so we need to, as an industry, start to be really clear on our standardizations and terminology. And you really need to understand it and respond to it, and really start to see where there are entries to become the brand leader for them. So in conclusion, we say to ourselves, look, the industry has arrived at a crossroads, but the consumers already made the turn in the journey. So the question now is, which products, services, and experiences will they seek, and which brands will adjust and become their preferred brand? So that's a summary. Thank you.
That is some amazing research, Kevin and Peter, that you have done with the WELLSurvey. And it's just fascinating to see kind of all the facets and how you set it up. And I love there were two key things that really stood out for me, this idea of opportunity, and messaging and how important that's going to be for hospitality brands moving forward. And then one, as an academic, earning that trust through science and evidence, right? To be able to differentiate and understand where are our consumers coming from. What's this messaging, the critical importance of the messaging that we give them to bring them to our organizations and provide services to help improve their wellness and well-being, which I think is really important. But you're right, the interchangeability of the terminology has blurred a lot within the industry. So I'm just very grateful that the two of you have come together to create this research to kind of tease it out, to allow us to think more deeply about our consumers. And the chat is going wild. They're very excited about the information you're sharing. So I do have a couple of questions just to kick it off. And kind of the first one is from Joanne. And Joanne asks, were you able to discern if there was a difference in how men and how women visualize wellness and well-being in your research?
Yeah, I'll take that one. The answer is yes, and there is no difference. Which is really remarkable. There are certainly other differences that we saw by gender, but their understanding of and interest in, most importantly, interest in the pursuit of the concept of well-being versus wellness, very, very similar. And that was demonstrated not only through their agreement with the definitions, but also, importantly, the word association test.
Excellent. We have another question that came in, and you started your first survey, the WELLSurvey 1.0 in the United States, and then expanded to the UK and Germany. Someone was very interested, and again, this is speculation because you haven't done the research yet, but there's interest from Thomas, who stated, I'm curious how this data would align with Asia, especially China, Japan, Korea, the Philippines, and also to Southern and Central Asia. For example, Turkey, India, Pakistan, since those markets are growing as well. Have you thought about the WELLSurvey 3.0?
Yes. Yes. I mean, we've asked and wondered the same thing. We those are emerging markets in wellness, or they're ancient markets, depending how you want to define well-being. And we would like to do a survey to look at that, ginormous. So even if you're saying, look, the income price point where you have discretionary income to spend on well-being and wellness activities, if it's 15% or 9% versus 60, 70% in the US and North America and Europe, it's still a huge market. So some of the penetration rate numbers we took a look at, we included those in those emerging or those Asian markets. But yeah, I think we would do the consumers and our business well by going to that as a 3.0 survey.
Yeah, let me just add a comment to that, if I may, Kevin, that one of the things and I think would be of interest to the audience, when we looked at the geographic differences in, for example, the utilization of medical treatments, spa therapies, alternative treatments, and so forth, we found very specific geographic differences in their interest and pursuit of those things. So, for example, respondents in the US tend to be a lot more exploratory in nature, that they're more inclined to consider, evaluate, and try some of the newer therapies and products and services that have been introduced in the marketplace. Less so in the UK, remarkably conservative in the UK in terms of their willingness to test and adopt. But also we found in Germany the highest incidence of their utilization of these non-traditional kinds of therapies and so forth. They also had different preferences in terms of the locations that they would like to patronize in terms of wellness or well-being kind of programming and results. Their understanding of the concepts of wellness and well-being is really very similar as being distinctive, and the definition, the principal defining characteristic of well-being, as we've demonstrated, I think here repeatedly, is the concept of emotional health.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have some more questions coming from the chat and one of them in particular, because how I had mentioned the earning trust through science was a great component. From Sundanda, the question is, how does strategies for wellness industry focus on integrating scientific expertise, and how might brands be able to do this? Any thoughts on, because you've got a survey that's science-based, gathering this data and this information, how, and mentioning that consumers trust more things that have science background, how can brands bring that into their portfolios? How can they bring that into their messaging? Kevin?
Yeah, well, I think it's important that they do, as the research shows, and it takes a little more work. It depends on which industry you're in. If you're in the hospitality business and you're trying to bring the perceived added costs of some scientific research, or a scientific consultant or nutritionist or somebody with a PhD in chemistry or an MD, in order to legitimize yourself with the consumer, you do need to have some investment in borrowing some of the scientific claims and having it validated either through your own internal operations or organization, or through some third-party validator. So I think the way to do that is, I think you have to make sure a lot of your claims are based on science. You need to do a little bit extra due diligence to validate science, because there's a lot of weak science out there and poorly validated science that's based on one study. It's not a double-blind study. So I think in order to do that, the earlier wellness resorts all had doctors and PhDs on staff, or some of the emerging ones went and borrowed some of those and brought them in as consultants to help them with their menu review or their nutritional review and some of their product claims. I think if you want to go after this next group of people, you're going to have to make some level of investment there. And then second, technologically, which you're going to have to make sure you understand how you can use the technology to synthesize and integrate some of your programs and services and products and messaging through technology.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Just
Excellent.
a follow-up thought on that, as Kevin knows, that when we looked, Heather, at the different ways that providers attempt to establish credibility in their claims, and Kevin shared the top three, we did not share the bottom three or bottom five. And I'll just mention two of them because you see them all the time in promotion. One is claims that happen to be tied to celebrities, celebrity endorsements in some fashion. When I say celebrity, I don't necessarily mean movie stars, but they could be celebrities by discipline. Maybe it's a fitness celebrity, maybe it's a nutritional celebrity, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
Those kinds of claims tend to be perceived as unreliable and untrustworthy. And the other one that you see all the time is claims that are tied to an endorsement provided by a current user, somebody who is a current guest or someone who supposedly has the achieved credibility of being a consumer or user. And those tend to be viewed as, again, untrustworthy and unreliable.
Mhm. You had mentioned in some of the questions that you would ask the survey participants of kind of where they find their information. And Helena added to the chat, you mentioned the importance of being connected to the platforms people already use. And I think, the social media platforms. So which platforms do you see as the most relevant today? This is a huge insight. Everyone's waiting with bated breath. What do they invest in? And how can hotels effectively integrate these platforms to enhance the guest experience and drive engagement? Do you have examples?
Well, not surprising. The biggest two that I think I mentioned were YouTube and podcasts, and part of the reason is you get to see people talking live. You get to evaluate them not simply by looking at a quick snapshot, but you're actually seeing something live. Those were the two most prevalent. Those are the only ones that broke 50% with the younger population, and those are the only ones that hit in the high 40s with the general group. The other ones, all the other standard ones, Instagram, all the Meta and the Google driven, and TikTok was another one. They were all in there, but they were in the 30s, right? As in terms of reliability, not in terms of use. And so what you start to parse out is it was the ability to watch somebody have a dialogue or conversation in a podcast. It was the ability to watch something, even though we all think the TikTok, it's a 9-second attention span, which is probably true when you're bored. But when you're trying to do research, finding somebody where you could observe their speaking and listen to them in a TED Talk or something, those found to be where they're perceived to be the most reliable. So there's two different messages. Obviously, you have to use the broader avenue in the top of the funnel. But then I think as you get deeper into the funnel and pull people in, I think you want to either use the other social media or use your own social media to validate with a little more substance.
Mhm. We have another question from the chat, and this is a slightly different kind of question to pursue from Alex, stating, with the rising price of gyms, spas, products, etc., wellness and well-being offerings tend to target the more affluent customers. How do we shift this industry to expand to lower and mid-income markets? So it becomes less about being a pure commercial engine and more about becoming a truly well-being engine, helping more people in the world leading healthier lives. Any thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, yes, that's the right objective.
Mhm.
And I have been involved in both the most expensive brands, where you're looking at a rev pour of $16 to $3,000 a night. There's 4 or 5 others that are like that, where luxury is the driver of the program experience. But then I've tried to also build brands that were more affordable, more obtainable, where people maybe can buy them by the glass, buy the programming by the glass, and have to buy these expensive packages. And that allowed us to go a little bit broader. But I think we have to think about to the policy point that I think this person's raising, the question infers, is I think we have to start really using technology as a way of sharing information and wearables as a way of collecting, or electronic medical record technology to share and collect. And I think you're going to see AI plays a role in this too. But there's no two ways about it. The disparity of health generally has clearly also shown up in these areas of well-being and longevity. And we have to find a way to break that so the culture is on the even playing field. Now, what we did find is as I go younger, and this is the motivator for businesses and technology companies to figure this out. As I go younger, there's a deeper demand for my longevity and my well-being. So that's important to know that. And then second, this is really important that we didn't really talk about. That younger market is twice as stressed out and anxious as the older age cohorts. Twice as stressed, which, as a parent makes me feel guilty. Um, and that's our fault. Culturally, it's our fault. Now, what we found though is that this group is twice as stressed, but highly resilient. That's a misnomer that people didn't realize. This is a resilient group. And more than anything else, they're using their well-being, they're leaning into it as a tool to offset and manage their stress. So back to the policy question, I think you've got a tremendously interested, curious market, TAM. You know who they are. They're a global market. You can speak to them with one core message, which is great. And they're using their well-being and longevity to lean into to offset the stress that they're experiencing. So I think those are some really good ingredients to motivate both policy leaders and companies to start really thinking about pricing, having a different price model.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned, Kevin, the policy, and we've talked about wellness, well-being in the context a lot of from the hospitality perspective of offerings. And then one of our guests who's watching, Petula, was mentioning that generally speaking, health outcomes are considered measurable changes in health status resulting from medical care, interventions, or public health programs. What's your sense of if or how these wellness initiatives or even the concept of what you're talking about of well-being, how might they impact morbidity and mortality statistics? Now, it's a little bit outside of the scope of what your survey was, but
Well, yeah, it is, but it's not. I'll tell you why. Because we're borrowing from some other people's research. But what she mentioned were things I can measure, right? So in our simple terminology, and I'm oversimplifying, but wellness activities I can measure. What's my blood pressure? How much REM sleep did I get? What's my resting heart rate, and so forth. What's my maximum VO2? And when those are important health metrics, those are my things I can measure, my wellness activities. I then marry those with my emotional state, and those are affected by, do I feel secure? Do I feel safe? Am I watching too much controversy on television and going to war? What do I have relationships? Do I have a dog? We know that one of the stronger indicators of healthier people are people that have relationships. So I think you have to realize that the sociological and the emotional factor, which now is, by the way, interlaced in all of how we run the gamut from wellness, well-being to longevity. Those deal with my sense of emotional safety and my relationships for two reasons. Obviously, if I have a physical ailment, if I have cancer, I've got emotional stress. Or I'm only as happy as my saddest child, right? There's other things involved. So having your sense of, I used to tell the statistic, we used to ask people, is their life imbalanced? And 3 out of 4 would say yes. And 3 out of 4 would say no, okay, that their life isn't imbalanced. And the fourth one was lying, right? Because we're always grappling with, the emotional state is no longer segregated, it's interwoven. Our emotional state is a feedback loop through every activity and every experience that we have. And so the emotional well-being is very much part of mortality.
Mhm. Mhm.
Let me just add another comment to that, Kevin. I think it's a great answer. Great question, by the way. And I'm not sure that we can give you, whoever posed the question, a definitive answer. But one thing I want to emphasize in the work that we've done and the takeaway that you hopefully will have from this is very rarely do I or we hear people who have made a career in this general industry acknowledge that the concept of well-being includes such elusive things as financial security.
Right.
Or how about concerns about the environment? I mean, these are dimensions that affect the emotional health of human beings. And when we talk about wellness and well-being and we conflate those terms, I think there's a total disregard for understanding that there's a whole other concentric circle, that envelops the way people feel about their well-being. Now, the implications for that are profound if you think about how, people in for example, the hospitality resort business, how they develop programming, because the programming is principally tied to the activities that can be measured. As we call them, the wellness inputs. And rarely does that programming evolve to include what we know increasingly are the issues that impact the way people feel about their well-being. And I think that's a very important distinction that hopefully we've been able to communicate here. And the other is how that's reported. I think Kevin expressed that very well, and that is it can't be episodic. It has to have a continuum to it, and it has to align with the values that those individuals have, because your values may be different than mine, and so forth. But we now have ways to understand what those are and to begin to track them and integrate them, into some kind of reporting system. So very important to understand that. Again, a little bit of a digression in the answer for that question, but I want to make sure that viewers understood the importance of some of these qualitative elements that kind of roll up into this concept of emotional health.
Well, when you think of it from a kind of a brand perspective, some of the key takeaways we're hoping people can take from today's webinar, things that they should consider in their messaging, in their product offerings. And I often, when I teach, talk about that connection, that emotional connection brands can make with their guests, with their clients. And if you can make that connection, people are more likely to come back, return, to share positive experiences, and it becomes something really important from a competitive advantage, that connection. And the connection is that emotional component of well-being that you've identified, not just the wellness, like I've got exercise
Right.
equipment, I have a fitness walk, but tying it to those components of well-being is going to create a lasting impact on your clientele or your guests. So what potentially, we have just a few minutes left now for our webinar, and what are some kind of key takeaways that you would want to share based on the research from the WELLSurvey and your experiences, that either something you can take away today or tomorrow, bring back to your organizations, or think about how do we build the foundation to address that opportunity that is there?
Well, let me get started, and then Kevin can offer his thoughts. But I think if you kind of dumb down all of this work into a handful of takeaways, number one is to acknowledge that there is a difference in the consumer's mind, although the consumer has been unable to articulate the difference because the providers conflate the terms, right? They continue to confuse everybody. There is a difference between those two ideas. And it's an important difference. By the way, it's a marketable difference. So there's a real commercial implication here between wellness and well-being. So point one, understanding the underpinnings of the difference, how they're different, is a critical piece. And I think we spent a lot of time on that, and the implications for not just program and product development, but more importantly, the implications for how you go to market. Best example would be, how about visualization? What are the images that we show that providers show? And I think there's a commonality to that. I mean, we can pick any of the 36 brands that we measured and pull examples of their websites or ads and so forth, and the imagery is all the same.
Mm-hmm.
And to the extent that that's the case, there's really a commoditization that's occurring here, which also feeds this confusion for consumers. So understand, if you believe there's a difference, you understand what that difference is. Think about how you take that message to the marketplace so that the message is different. And the final is that We've identified this group we call Wellzoomers. They are uniquely different. Kevin mentioned we didn't put slides in here on things like, some of their lifestyle and behavioral preferences. If we showed those to you and you compare those to other age cohorts, I mean, they're radically different, statistically significantly different. So these are not just, minor differences in perspective. These are lifestyle differences. Understanding what those are, we think that's the future of this industry. As we like to say, well Zoomers are going to rock the world of what people call wellness today, and that rocking is about to occur. It'll occur over the next 5, 7, 10 years as well Zoomers grow into their more mature states, not just because of what they believe in the way they live, but also their economic power. So, to me, those are very practical things that hopefully viewers could think about.
Evan?
Well, two thoughts. In a study Peter and I did for some CEOs last year, we took a look at the market trends around Tesla, Apple, and the wellness industry, and sort of looked at this J curve, or what economists talk about, the hockey stick or the J curve acceleration curve. And the wellness industry collectively is in this huge upside of that curve. This is the golden period. Now, what happened was the countercultural people started this industry. The hospitality industry joined it. Hospitals started to realize, not just hospitality, but geez, there's discretionary money. I want to get a piece of that. So they started to join it. Then the technology people started to say, I can measure stuff. We have these little lights and we can measure rings and bands and watches. And then you had all of these, what I would call the showmen are out there saying, I can create some new product and call it a supplement or call it this or that, based on some real science, some of them, and based on some pseudoscience, and some of them made up. And so you have this product, hospitality, you have hospitals, technology, science, all of them converging into this new J-curve category called well-being, but it lacks standards. So I can do blood work in Singapore or London or New York. Everyone agrees what a blood platelet is. But in wellness, we're using different terminology, which Peter pointed out around wellness and well-being. We need to standardize that industry as we're starting to see the volume. Second, those who are part of organizing the standardization and organizing the message into the right groups in the right way, I think we'll have the ability to emerge with some dominance, because there's a void in the market, because the market is both extremely noisy, extremely fast-paced and growing, but it's been commoditized, right? There's a dilution of brand awareness. So I think there's an opportunity for brands, product brands, leisure travel brands, to reorganize and basically standardize some better language, use the right messages that really speak to people based on the kind of parsed research we've done, and clearly going after the well-zoomer. That is a more urban, more ethnically, culturally diverse. And what's happening is they're now starting to understand their consumer power. So they're starting to insist. There's a phrase of, well, if you do stacked wellness menus in your hotel, that's my mother and my father's place. You know what I mean? It's not mine. So we have to start really understanding that they are starting to insist on, we deliver it in a different way that fits their ecosystem and in the technology that they've been swimming in since they were born.
Wow, this has just been amazing. And as Peter mentioned, we really are just kind of doing a quick summary of the survey. So, check in the chat, and there's a QR code to be able to link directly to the research that Peter and Kevin have created with the WELLSurvey 1.0 and 2.0. So, feel free to dig in, and then you can reach out to us. We'll put in the chat our socials on LinkedIn to connect if you have questions or further discussion, because as both Peter and Kevin mentioned, this is something that is a huge opportunity. Hopefully there's a brand or a few brands coming together to create that messaging terminology to share and be able to capture the well Zoomers and really explore this market further. So again, check out the research linked into the chat. And then for the audience, I just wanted to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us today as we're exploring these ideas and practices that you can adopt in your professional arena focused around designing experiences, thinking about wellness, understanding the differences between the consumer's understanding of wellness and well-being, and where's there opportunities for us to unlock that. Thank you, Peter, and thank you very much, Kevin, for joining us and sharing your work. It has just been amazing to be able to see, and hopefully in the future, maybe we'll have another webinar sharing the Wellness 3.0 results in the future. So,
Thank
yeah.
you.
Thank you.